Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in today's video, we'll talk about useMemo hook. So we'll discuss about how you can use useMemo and what problem does it solve, and we also see when we should be using useMemo. And at the end of the video, I'll also compare and I'll also talk about the differences between the useCallback and useMemo hook. So now let's get started. So before understanding what is useMemo and how does it work, we need to understand a process called memoization. So let's talk about what is memoization. So in simple terms, memoization is a process that allows us to cache the values of a recursive or an expensive function call, so that whenever the next time that function is called with the same argument, then we do not need to run that function once again. Instead, we can just return the cached value. And what is the benefit of it? The benefit is that our application run faster, because here we do not need to run that same expensive function once again. Instead, we are just returning the value that we have just already stored. So what is memoization is basically, it means that suppose we have an expensive function, and when that function, it takes some time to run, and now every time whenever we run that function, our application becomes slower. So here in this case, if we are passing the same type of parameter in the function, that means it will return the same result. So in this scenario, instead of running that function once again and again, what we can do is that we can cache the result of that function, and before executing that function, we can check if we have already run that function with the same input argument. And if yes, then we do not need to run that function. Instead, we can just return that value that we had previously cached. So that is what called memoization. So now let's see what is useMemo. So useMemo is a React hook that can be used to implement memoization, and what it does is that it memoizes the result of a function call, and hence we can avoid unnecessary recomputation. And useMemo, it's a built-in React hook that accepts two parameters. And the first parameter that it takes is the function. So most of the time it's an expensive function that takes some time to run, and the second parameter is an array of dependency. So what useMemo does is that it takes a function, and that function is most of the time is a resource intensive function or expensive function, and it returns the memoized value of that function. That means whatever the value that the function is returning, so useMemo returns that. The second parameter, we can pass them dependency. So using the dependency, we can control when we should recompute that function. And in the next slide, we have the syntax of the useMemo. So you can see on the right side, here's the useMemo hook. So inside the useMemo hook, first parameter, we are passing an expensive function, and the second is the dependency array. And so the dependency array is important, because using the dependency array, you can actually control when you want that expensive function to run. So you can pass different types of dependency array. So if you pass a dependency array which is empty, that means you are passing an empty dependency array. In that case, the function will run, the expensive function which you are passing inside the useMemo, that function will run only one time, and that is only because during when the component gets mounted, and after that it will not run. If you have actually passed some value, so you can see you have passed the value a, b. So if you have passed some value, in that case what will happen is that that expensive function will only run when that dependency will change. So that is how you can control when you want that expensive function to run. And if you don't pass anything, so suppose as a second parameter you are not passing anything, that means it will recompute that function on every time whenever the component gets re-rendered. So now let's see the code example of it and how you can use useMemo hook in code. So now I am inside my VS Code. So here I have created a blank React project using Vite, and I have started the local server. So the first thing that I'll do is that I'll create two count A and count B using the useState. So let's do that. Now what I will do is that I will display this count A and count B in the screen, and I will create two buttons that will basically increase this counter. So what we have done is that we have created two counter, count A and count B, and I have created two button that will basically increase this counter. So if we refresh the screen and if we click on this button, count A is increasing and count B also increasing. So what we will do is that actually we will create two functions. So instead of just directly displaying like this, we will create two functions, and using that we will display that count value. So let's do that. I'll create a function called print count A, and let's do that. And the similar way we will create a function for count B as well. And we want to add a console log here because we want to check when this function is running. Print count A runs. And now here we can just call this function. Okay, let me refresh the screen, clear the console. Now if you click on this button, you can see the count A is also increasing. If you refresh the this button count B, then count B is also increasing. Okay, that is fine. But there is one problem in this code. So I'll just show you the problem. If we clear the console and if we click on this count A button, so when you are clicking on this count A button, then you can see print count A, count B, both of these are running. So if we click on this again, count A and count B, print count A, print count B, this both of this function is running when we are clicking on this count A button, increase count A. Now let's test for count B as well. Let me clear the console, and if we click on this, you can see the count A, count B, both of these are running. If we click on this, once again it is count A and count, like print count A and print count B. These two functions are running in this case also. So here the problem is basically, so when we are clicking on this increase count A button, then we are only increasing the count A value. We are not changing the count B value. Ideally what we want is that when we are increasing the count A, we clicking on this button, we only want this print count A function to run. We don't want this print count B to run, because when you are clicking on this increase count A, then count B is not changing. So we don't want this function to run, and the vice versa is true for count B also. So when we are clicking on this count B button, then we only want this function to run. We don't want this to run. This count A, we don't want it to run because its value is not changing. But at present our code scenario is that whenever we are clicking on any button, then both of these function is running. And so we can say that this is an unnecessary rerunning of a function. Now in this case it's not a big problem, because in print count A and count B we have not done any resource intensive task here. But suppose inside the print count A or count B, maybe we are doing some network calls or doing some complex operations. So in that case that might be a problem, because at that time you will be unnecessarily running resource intensive functions. So to avoid that, we have to do something so such that we don't want this print count A and print count B unnecessarily. So now let's see how you can do that. So now here to solve this problem, to stop unnecessarily re-rendering of that function print A, print B, so what we will do is that we will be using useMemo hook, and we'll pass that function inside the useMemo, and in that way useMemo will return a memoized value, and that will not be recalculated on every re-render. So let's see. So first I will import the useMemo. It is imported now. So inside the useMemo I will pass the function. So I'll just move this function definition here, and as the second parameter it will take a dependency. So the dependency will pass as a count A, and it will return as a memoized value. So I'll give it a name as memoized print A, and we'll do the same thing from the other one also. I'll just move this thing here, and I can comment these two out. So basically what we have done is that we have moved those two functions inside the useMemo hook, and here we have to pass that dependency as count b also. So now what useMemo returns is that useMemo takes that function and useMemo returns the memoized value that we are earlier getting from this function. So in the memoized print b, we are getting this value count b plus this thing we are getting from the print b, and this memoized print b is a memoized value. That means whenever it will not be recreated on every time component gets re-rendered. Instead, what will happen is that when the component gets re-rendered and the value of count b is changing, then only the print b will be, this memoized print b will be recalculated. And the same goes true for this one else as well. So whenever the component gets re-rendered and count a value gets changes, then only it will this print memoized print a value will be updated. So now here we do not need to execute the the invoke the function. Instead we can just write the value memoized print a, and we will write here memoized print b. Now if we refresh the screen and we clear the console, you can click on this increase count a. If we click on this, you can see the count of a is increasing, and you can see only we are getting that print count a runs. So we are not running that print count b. So that is the expected behavior. So this is how you can, you can stop the unnecessarily running of some expensive function. So basically whenever we are clicking on this count a button, so count a value is stored in the state. That means the component gets re-rendered, but this memoized this value will not be recalculated, because here we have passed the dependency as count b, and only this count print a, this memoized print a is recalculated, and we are displaying the data. And the same goes true for the count b as well. If we click on this count b, you can see only the count b function is running. So in that case count a is not running, because here we pass the dependency as b. So this is how you can use useMemo hook. And I'll just give you an overview what we have done is that, so just remember that the main thing is that so useMemo, it takes a function as an input and it returns a memoized value of that function which we are getting from that function. So whatever value that the function was returning, useMemo returns that only, but it memoizes that. That means it will not regenerate that value every time that component gets re-rendered. Instead, it will check if some dependency has changed or not. And if the dependency has changed, then only we will recreate that function. That means re-execute that function. And that is how we can stop unnecessarily re-rendering of the expensive function. This was a simple example about how you can use useMemo to stop unnecessary re-rendering of the components. So now you might be thinking that let's put everything inside the useMemo and let's memoize everything, but that may not be the best approach. So here are some tips that when you should not be using useMemo. So do not use useMemos to store the data that changes frequently. That is because in useMemo what we do is that, so if there are some functions and when that function that runs frequently, and whenever that function runs, that the data does not change that much, so that can be a good candidate for useMemo. But if the data does change very often, then there is no point of memoizing that, because if we memoizing that, we will be returning the stale data, and that may not be the best thing to do. So do not use useMemo for that data that changes frequently. And now the second thing is that after using useMemo, you should check if the performance of the application has increased or not. So just check the performance of the application without using useMemo, and just check after the using useMemo if the performance has been increased or not, because that is how you can actually check if using useMemo actually helped you to improve performance or not. And now the next thing is that do not be using useMemo everywhere, because whenever you are using useMemo, then it may hurt your application performance because it increases memory usage, and hence the garbage collection efficiency is reduced. So just use useMemo carefully and do not overuse it. So now let's talk about useMemo and useCallback hook difference. So basically these two hooks are kind of similar and very confusing, because these two hooks are similar and both of them helps to achieve memoization in React. But the thing is that there is a difference between them, and let's see what is the difference between them. So the main difference between useMemo and useCallback is that useMemo returns as a memoized value, whereas useCallback returns as a memoized function. That means useMemo will memoize that useMemo will take the function, and whatever function, like whatever value that the function was returning, it will just memoize that value. Whereas in the other hand, the useCallback, it will memoize that entire function and return that memoized version of that function. So if you want to understand more about useCallback, then I have created a new video about that. So I'll link the video to the description and in the I button, you can check that. And so here it is saying that useMemo is used to memoize a value between renders. It accepts a function and list of dependencies, and it will call the function and return its results only if one of the dependency has been changed. And this can help improve performance of your application by reducing unnecessary recalculation of the value. On the other hand, useCallback is used to memoize a callback function between renders. So it accepts a function and returns, and also takes a list of dependencies, and it will return a memoized value of the function that only changes if one of the dependency has changed. And this can improve performance of your application by reducing unnecessary recreation of the function. So yeah, so in the summary, I will say that both of these useMemo and useCallback hooks are kind of similar, and they helps in achieve memoization in React. But the thing is that the what value they memoize, that is what the difference between the useMemo and useCallback. So I hope this video was helpful to you and you have understood how the useMemo hook works and when you should be using and how to use it. So I hope this video helped you understand that. And if you like this video, then please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And as always, thanks for watching. Have a nice day.